Planet Earth is comprised of 1/4 land and 3/4 water, geographically. The average human body is composed of up to 90% of its weight in water from birth. The human fetus spends 9 months approximately in utero and in water. All living creatures that have breath are born in and or from water. The Earth contains roughly 368 trillion cubic meters of water. Humans throughout history have used less than 10% of the world's water resources at any time. The average modern-day human being uses approximately 100 gallons of water a day. That is 5 times the weight of the average human being, over 800 pounds. The average healthy human being will drink up to 3 gallons of water a day. All of the planet's most ancient mythos, theos, and cosmologies record creation events that begin with water. All laws, since primordial antiquity, were written to regulate land and sea separately. Laws pertaining to land became the law of the land, or rather natural or common law, and laws pertaining to the sea became law of the sea, or rather Maritime Admiralty law, which is international law and the same everywhere in the world, no matter where you go. All laws since time immemorial originate from and are based upon ecclesiastical or canon law via the ancient laws and ecclesiastical right of kings. Natural or common law primarily preserves the inalienable rights and needs of human beings who live on land, differing between nations. The law of the sea, or Maritime Admiralty law, primarily grants the right that is legal to conduct merchant, banking, corporate, international commerce. Seeing how living persons cannot live on or in water for extended periods of time, and the Earth's seas have been used primarily for travel since antiquity, regulation of the sea for merchant, trafficking, shipping, and commerce through law became necessary for the merchants of nations to do business internationally. The law of the sea, Maritime Admiralty law, is universal and transcends all national boundaries and laws legally. What is legal is not necessarily lawful. Natural or common law, the law of the land preserving the rights and freedoms of living persons, is lawful. Maritime Admiralty law, or UCC, Universal Commercial Code, is legal, and that legal robbery and murder. In ancient Rome, a Roman maxim law stated that he who will be deceived, let him be deceived, which means the responsibility of the deception is on the one that is deceived by it. Basically, if you get it up the hoop, or what we commonly refer to as being stiffed, shafted, that's your problem. Unbeknownst to everyone, Maritime Admiralty law, the international law of the high seas, came upon land like a flood and made every man, woman, and child since that time dead in the water. The word maritime comes from the Proto-Italic cognates mer, mar, mare, and mari, which all mean water. These cognates are found in words like commerce and merchant and maritime. The water that flows by currents in rivers is directed by the river banks. Water that flows in the world of Maritime Admiralty law is money, because money is water. Money is currency. Treaty Act of 1540, enacted by the then King Henry VIII, reworked and instated by Charles I of the time. Sestuakevi from the Old French into English means "this killed that life." This made all men, women, and children presumed and assumed dead, and a trust set up. According to Black's Law Dictionary, Sestuakevi means the person whose life measures the duration of a trust, gift, estate, or insurance contract. The life of a trust is 7 years under the law of limited liability. This act is most diabolically evil because it killed everyone and gave them 7 years to claim back their lives. The fires of 1666 also created the only parcel of land on the planet that does not have a title deed, the Golden Mile, the City of London, which is a corporation having its own flag, its own constitution and laws, its own defense and police forces. The Golden Square Mile holds the Bank of England, the London Metal Exchange, Fleet Street, FTSE Stock Exchange, the Royal Mint, and the Old Bailey Courthouse. The United States channels billions yearly to the Bank of England to pay the Crown's tribute. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was set up, the brainchild of a secret meeting held on Jekyll Island in 1910. As United States Inc.'s debt soared well above the estimated gold reserves the corporation of the U.S. held as a standard for the dollar, the Federal Reserve Act was passed on Christmas Eve while Congress was away, giving the power for a foreign corporate entity to print fiat and collect interest on monies created from thin air. A bank does not loan you money. That's illegal. A bank gives you credit, which is legal, but not necessarily lawful. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration was introduced, paving the way for the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. The Bolshevik Revolution broke out in Russia that was funded and began by Wall Street bankers such as Jacob Schiff and J.P. Morgan. That same year, Woodrow Wilson signed in the War Powers Act that basically stated that the U.S. was stopping all trade with the enemy except for those whom are granted a license, which excluded Americans. Licenses began to be issued in 1933. In 1933, the U.S. had reached Section 11 bankruptcy. President Roosevelt amended the War Powers Act of 1917 and declared all U.S. citizens as enemies of the state. There was a declared national emergency on March 9th, with an emergency act being passed placing all power, property, and resources of the U.S. into the hands of the President under martial law that has continued ever since. This is renewed yearly by executive order. The Federal Reserve began to print fiat money. The all-seeing eye was placed on the dollar bill. All men, women, and children born ever since arrive as collateral for U.S. Inc.'s debt, as slaves and enemies of the state. The balance of debt versus collateral is determined through illegal wars for profit, where the debt versus collateral is balanced, or rather the herd of slaves is thinned out. What all this means, ladies and gentlemen, is you are all slaves and cannon fodder for the nations you are in and who are subservient to the rulers running them. You have been turned into collateral for national debts. Consider this when hearing about the imminent collapse of the economy soon to take place. When debts cannot be paid, you are said to be in deep water, and those in deep water usually drown. Shylock, according to Shakespeare, asks for a pound of flesh to pay the bill. The owners of U.S. Inc. demand the same according to Admiralty Maritime statutes you are all under. The sun never did set on the Roman Empire, and Rome is just as alive today as it was a couple thousand years ago. You are all owned property and subservient to a crown, whether you like it or not. You are all considered dead and unclaimed by the crown, who laid claim and made you their bitch. You cannot, nor are you allowed to speak for yourself, as dead persons cannot speak, and is why you need a lawyer to speak for you in a court. The dead have no rights. This is all based upon ancient ecclesiastical or canon law at its root and core. When you board a ship called a church, which is also considered a bank under Maritime Admiralty, and embark upon it, the licensed and registered pastor or priest must teach and keep you obedient to the monarch, the crown. Because he who wears the crown, which is the monarch, is the head of the ship called church. He is the king, the lord and captain of the ship called church, and the pastor or priest is an agent of the crown. Maritime Admiralty, or rather Universal Commercial Code, or UCC, is the matrix pulled over everyone's eyes that governs all, because everything has been made into ships on the sea of corporate commerce. Without their one eye, which is money, which is water, all ships are dead at sea and cannot traverse their fictional matrix they created. It's now high time for a concerted universal mutiny.
We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election.